Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. And in tonight's video, I'd like to talk to you about the philosophy of Stoicism and my thoughts on Stoicism. I've noticed as I've been looking through my YouTube stats that one of the search terms that a lot of you have been searching who follow this channel is Stoicism. So I wanted to explore a little bit about that philosophy tonight. I want to give my thoughts on Stoicism as well, and why I think Stoicism has become so popular recently as we've begun to have something of a resurgence. So stick around for all of that. So the founder of Stoicism is considered to be the philosopher Zeno, who in classic Greek times was shipwrecked on the shores of Athens, lost everything, and then eventually rose to become a great teacher, a great philosopher. And the place where he would gather with his students to discuss philosophical topics was a colonnade in Athens known as the Stoa. And this is where the term Stoicism comes from. Other noteworthy Stoic philosophers include Marcus Aurelius, who was one of history's true philosopher kings. He was the emperor of the Roman Empire at the height of its greatness before his incompetent son Commodus came along and stuffed everything up, and that's sort of what began the decline of the Roman Empire over the next couple of hundred years. But Marcus Aurelius was truly a great man. And in addition to being a great and competent ruler, he was also the author of a book called Meditations, really just his journals talking about the lessons that he'd learnt from life, the wisdom of the world that he thought was useful and beneficial, and that became a book in its own right. It could be considered the first self-help book in history. Another great Stoic philosopher is Seneca, who was the tutor to a young Nero, another Roman emperor who perhaps doesn't have the best reputation. Some of that is deserved, some not so much. But the family of the future emperor saw fit to turn to Seneca when they needed a wise person to pass on their knowledge and wisdom to the young Nero. And Seneca was their choice. You can really start to track Nero's kind of downward spiral along with when he was no longer under the influence of Seneca so much. But he again is considered a great Roman philosopher and a great Stoic philosopher. And there's also Epictetus, who began as a slave and rose to become a teacher of philosophy. So many of Stoicism's most preeminent philosophers were also very accomplished individuals and well respected in the times in which they live, or at least coming from nothing came to be well respected. And perhaps this is part of the philosophy's appeal. Stoicism as its own philosophy touches on a lot of areas of life and our understanding of the world, but I'm going to focus on the moral and ethical philosophy of Stoicism because that is what it's most known for, and that is what most people see as appealing when they say that they like Stoic philosophy. So in Stoicism, there is a great amount of importance and emphasis put on the notion of virtue, an action which is motivated by virtue and virtue alone, because it is the right thing to do simply because that virtue is right, is the only kind of good action according to the Stoics. And on the other hand, doing things for material gain can be good or bad, depending on how that material acquisition is used. And so ultimately it falls short of the standard of goodness that can be provided through moral action, through virtuous action. There's a lot of emphasis in Stoicism on self-improvement, and there's a lot of emphasis as well on self-control, controlling the passions, controlling the emotions, and using that self-control to overcome the more negative and destructive kinds of emotions that we can feel. The Stoics believed that there was a rational order to the universe, And since the order of the universe was rational, it could also be considered good. And you can understand the reason behind everything by studying the universe, by studying its laws, and making sense of everything. And to get an idea of the intrinsic order in the universe, that kind of idea, consider the pine cone, which was a very prevalent symbol in ancient Greece, sometimes associated with the cult of Bacchus. But if you look at the pine cone, you can see a mathematical pattern within the pine cone, what we would call today a Fibonacci sequence. No doubt the Stoics and other classical Greek philosophers would take the symmetry of the pine cone as a sign that there is an order to nature. And to come by wisdom and to come by goodness, we need to understand that order and then align with it. And the Stoics would certainly agree with that. For the Stoics, the passions were irrational and were therefore misaligned with the order of the universe, whereas virtue was rational. It considered not just what somebody wanted or craved or yearned for by their passion, but considered what was good for everybody, and taking action that would be good for the whole as well as the part, and was therefore in alignment with the rational order of the universe. And so on this basis, the Stoics found a kind of a metaphysical justification for virtue and reason and living a measured and self-controlled lifestyle. And also core to the Stoic philosophy was that our notion of goodness, our ability to discern good from bad, was not something that was imposed from outside of us, but came from deep within, what we would call today our conscience. And that conscience, since the universe was rational and ordered, our being was rational and ordered, and there was a part of us which recognized, and if you like, kind of resonated with the order in the universe, and sought to act in an orderly fashion itself. Since we also have order in our hearts, from our heart, from within, from our own integral nature, a sense of what is good and bad could emerge. So this idea of the rational ordering principle that governs the universe and maintains order in the universe was known to the Greeks as the Logos. It was very associated with the sun god Apollo, but later on, as early as in the Gospel of John, where the word literally is a translation from the Greek logos, this concept of the Logos would be appropriated by Christianity and would have a great influence on Christianity. And the early Christians took inspiration from this ancient Greek idea of the Logos and recognized in that idea something like what they believed the cosmic Christ represented, the ordering, governing principle of the universe. They recognized something of their idea of the Christ in that principle. And of course, the idea of conscience greatly influenced St. Paul in his ideas about the law that is written on the heart, rather than tablets of stone that somebody reads from and tells you what to do. So we can see again Stoicism being a big influence on early Christian philosophy. The big difference, however, between Stoicism and early Christianity was, whereas Stoicism saw a rational order which was very hierarchical and very unequal, Christianity saw that the good order of the universe, properly understood, as a loving order, where there is importance in every life, no matter how lowly they are. So that would probably be the big difference. I prefer the Christian idea, to be honest. The principles and ideas of Stoicism put a lot of emphasis on individual responsibility. Epictetus said it's not events happening to people that cause bad situations in their life, but merely their reaction to them. And so Stoics put a lot of emphasis on perhaps not complaining so much about their situation and making the best of it as much as they could and exercising a great deal of resilience and self-control in everyday life. So that's probably the basics of Stoicism as I understand it. There's a lot of misconceptions about Stoicism. There's really one chief misconception about Stoicism, which is that it's all about repressing your emotions. Emotional repression, not allowing yourself to feel things that you really want to feel, and that it's about trying to become like an emotionless robot, or maybe, like one of the people living in Equilibrium, if you've seen that film. It's a common misconception that that's what Stoicism is trying to do. You might also think of somebody who's considered tough, who just doesn't react to anything, could bang their finger with a hammer, hammering in a nail, and just won't react, just immune to pain. That's not what Stoicism is either. It's not about repression, it's not about not feeling, because neither of those things are even possible. It's about recognizing the emotion and then exercising control over it, not just letting it through the gate, but stopping it and considering it first, and then determining how you want to respond to that stimulus that's caused the emotion. So that's the key difference, and it's actually far from being emotionally repressive or emotionally stunting. It's actually a very important thing to develop as an emotionally mature adult, to be able to regulate your emotions in that way. And that's what Stoicism promotes. So what are my thoughts on Stoicism as a philosophy? Would I consider myself a Stoic? Well, I've been described as Stoic in the past, in certain high-pressure situations. But I've never really thought of myself as somebody who prescribes to Stoic philosophy, although I find, as I've kind of had to educate myself on Stoicism for this video, just simply by default, just the way that I've been living my life already, there is a lot of parallels with how the Stoic would say that somebody should live their life. I consider myself a very mentally resilient person. I consider myself somebody who's very driven, and I also, obviously, I've spoken about the virtues a lot on this channel already, and the importance of cultivating virtue, the importance on doing the work on oneself. All of those things which are common to the spiritual path overlap a lot with Stoicism and the sentiment behind Stoic philosophy. And of course, things like magic and Raja Yoga, which I have practiced a lot over the years, put a big emphasis on willpower and gaining control over the other parts of your mind and hacking the other parts of your mind using sheer willpower. So in that respect, you could say that there's some parallels with Stoicism as well. All the stuff about cultivating virtue as the only true good and the meaninglessness of material gain for its own sake, couldn't agree more. All the stuff about controlling your reactions to things, couldn't agree more. So then, what are my thoughts on why Stoicism is so popular? Well, I think part of it is simply that we live in an age of self-help, and Stoicism has a lot in common with the modern self-help movement, the sorts of advice, the sorts of kinds of ideas that it puts forward, very, very similar to the modern self-help movement. And like I said, there's even some who consider Marcus Aurelius's Meditations to be the very first self-help book in history. But that stuff's been around for a while now, for quite a few decades, and Stoicism has only recently had a resurgence. So I think there's more to it than that. And I'll tell you what I think about that. I think it's because something has gone really wrong with modernity, and people recognize that and they're looking for an alternative to that. If you think about modern society, I don't mean the whole modern era, I mean more so in the last decade or so. What are the key characteristics of modern society? What are the things that are constantly promoted in modern society. We're encouraged to be lazy, to sit around and order something that we don't want to go get ourselves. We're encouraged to seek immediate gratification through whatever kind of stimulating activity you can think of, instead of going out into the world and trying to do things and accomplish things to get that dopamine hit and to get that sense of accomplishment. We're taught to seek comfort and safety over anything that might challenge us, that might push us outside our comfort zone and make us feel like, like we're a bit nervous, or that we're not comfortable 100% of the time. And we freak out over that. Instead of seeing it as a natural part of life and an opportunity for growth. We're encouraged on the internet and social media to be overly sensitive and have thin skin and react to things that people have said and draw conclusions about people. We're encouraged again and again to conform with the crowd, to comply with the status quo, and everything will be okay. And this is the exact opposite of following your individual conscience. But even though paradoxically we're told to follow the crowd, just do what everybody else does, be like everybody else, wear the clothes that everybody else wears, use the filters that everybody else uses, and have the same life path that everybody else has, paradoxically, we have no genuine sense of community. All of our relationships are superficial, and all of our goals are superficial. The thing that we value most, the person that we value most, is ourselves. We engage in endless self-love and self-care to reassure ourselves that everything is okay whenever we feel unsafe from the problems in our life that most of the time aren't that big of a deal, but we feel like they are because we've been trained to be overly sensitive to everything. So we feel like we have to focus on ourselves, and we have to nurse ourselves, and we have to love ourselves above all others, because nobody else will, because we live in such an alienated, atomized modern world. And so there is no genuine sense of community. And what passes for community is just tribalism. It's just online in-groups who are just hurling insults at one another and not trying to understand one another. All of these supposed values of modern society, all of the ways that modern society encourages us to be, you will notice are the exact opposite of Stoicism. And because the world and our society is such a mess right now, and many of the problems that now face our society that are tearing it apart have been decades in the making and can be traced back to attitudes and beliefs we've adopted as a culture, which can be considered modern. And so people naturally see that. They see the failure of modern belief systems to create a better world. And so they look for something which is the opposite of the attitudes that are encouraged by modernity, by modern society. Perhaps postmodern society is a more apt description. And they go to that for meaning, to try and reverse the damage that has been done to society by us accepting these other philosophies. Because of a lot of the new kinds of opinions that seem to be predominating in today's modern world, there is a crisis in masculinity. And I believe that this crisis in masculinity is intrinsically linked to the rise of Stoicism. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that 85% of you or thereabouts are male, around the same age group as me, and you're also interested in Stoicism. Now, everybody is saying now that there's this crisis in masculinity. It's become a talking point, but I don't really think that most people understand why there's a crisis in masculinity. Because the truth behind why there is a crisis in masculinity is an uncomfortable one. People talk about the crisis in masculinity like it's this big accident that no one really understands, no one saw coming. It's like there's just these tectonic shifts in society, and because society is changing so much, and the old traditional role of the man is no longer compatible with this new world, suddenly we just don't know what to do. Men don't know what to do, and no one really knows how to help them, and they've just sort of fallen through the cracks in this changing world. However, over the past few years, what I've come to realize as I watch endless advertisements and endless Netflix series and endless Hollywood movies is that there is something very intentional behind the crisis in masculinity. Since about 2017, we have seen certain forces in society which represent a radical point of view, which seem to have occupied all of the spaces in society where they can dictate the dominant narrative from being put forward from cultural institutions. And we've seen this radical movement rise, people who are resentful towards men per se. There's been this concerted effort to attack men and to attack the concept of masculinity. We've had all of these conversations about toxic masculinity. There's a definition of toxic masculinity that I think everybody agrees upon. You know, the kind of macho guy who just has a lot to prove. Ironically enough, I think that most times those guys are the most insecure about their sense of masculinity, which is an argument for more masculinity, not less, but that's a topic for another time. But this label of toxic masculinity seems to increasingly just be used to apply to all forms of masculinity. We're told that masculinity needs to change, that the masculinity of the past was toxic masculinity, but nobody told us what the alternative was. We had to figure it out for ourselves because we're the ones that supposedly created the problem. But then whenever some cultural figure does come along, some of them more shady than others, but some acceptable, who start talking about men and men's issues, they're immediately labelled as a MRA and accused of centering men and of men making it so that men are taking up space when they're not the most oppressed group, and we should just shut up and let somebody else have a platform. So you just can't win. And so we have this situation where the old forms of masculinity have been demolished very deliberately. No alternative has been presented. So the only kind of image of masculinity, the only model of masculinity that young men have who are trying to understand how to become men, adult men, is how they're portrayed in the media, which is as always stupid and useless, or worse still, just plain evil. Somebody who was born a monster because they were born a man and needs to be trained by society not to be a monster. That's the messaging that young men are getting from the society in which they live, the society they want to contribute to, but are constantly rejected by. So where am I going with all of this? There's a reason why I'm bringing up the crisis in masculinity and going so much in depth with it, and it's because I want to demonstrate to you that, and speaking as a young man myself, well, maybe not so young anymore, but certainly of the generation which has been most exposed to this stuff, it does feel like society has failed us as men and can't tell us who we are. And so naturally, when that starts to happen, if you are a young man and you really want to know how to emerge into your manhood, you're going to look elsewhere. You're going to look away from modern society. And so where do you look if not in the society in which you live? Well, the rational thing to do would be maybe if things started going wrong at a certain point in the history of the Western world, which is where these kinds of crises seem to be unfolding in Western countries, to look back to the past, seeing as the future has not come into being yet and the present doesn't offer any solutions. It's natural to look to the past and to the past of the culture in which the crisis is unfolding. So naturally, that's going to lead certain people to stumble upon the classical Greek and Roman worldview and some of the philosophies that they espoused, which remain very influential to this day and have had a huge influence on the whole history of philosophy in Western society. So Stoicism is a natural choice, and it's also a natural choice for men as well, as a kind of philosophical system to give their life meaning. And the reason for that is because a lot of the values that are espoused by Stoicism are what were once considered the traditional kind of healthy, positive, masculine values. It's not to say that only men can demonstrate those personality traits, but it was taken as part of particularly men's character in the way that people were socialized for thousands of years. And it's the thing which has kind of been browbeaten out of the young men of today, and the thing that's missing in their life that will actually improve their mental health more than anything else. So I'm happy that so many young people are finding Stoicism, particularly young men. I think they really need something to give them a sense of purpose in their life and feel like they are valued and they are useful and they're not just trash, which is what modern society and the modern media tells them. And Stoicism can provide that, and all of that is very in line with spiritual principles. All of the stuff about cultivating virtue being good in itself, just getting stuff, being a relative good, all the stuff about finding the order, the divine order that governs the universe, the stuff about not reacting, all very compatible with a spiritual worldview, are all lessons of life that I've come to accept on my own journey, kind of parallel to Stoicism, without really intending to be a Stoic myself. So if you're into Stoicism, if that's your thing, good on you. Keep at it. I hope that it brings you a sense of fulfillment in your life. And I hope that this video has helped you understand Stoicism a bit more from my own perspective. So if you did like this video, please leave a like, subscribe to this channel to support my work, leave any comments you have down below. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.